This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and tonight on Signal, we dig deep into the big college admission scandal to find some of the craziest things money can buy. Then, the U.S. women's soccer team has been killing it, so why aren't they being paid like superstars? And NBA Hall of Famer Shaq on an issue near and dear to his heart. But first, we're going to start with the least surprising surprise announcement in politics, Beto O'Rourke running for president. After months of speculation, the former Texas congressman formally announced his candidacy this morning before hitting the campaign trail in Iowa with what seemed like the entire media pool in tow. But while Beto's in Iowa now, earlier this week, most of the Democratic hopefuls went to his stomping grounds of Texas for South by Southwest, the uber zeitgeisty festival of music, tech, culture, and now politics. Everyone's selling something at South by Southwest. A new album, an indie film, a tech startup. But the place that once launched things like Twitter and Foursquare is now introducing you to people like him.
The opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math.
That's presidential candidate Andrew Yang. He's here to sell himself. Never heard of him? That's kind of why he's in Austin. It's hard to imagine candidates making inroads at Coachella or Burning Man, but they're all here in Texas. Like Iowa State fairs and New Hampshire diners, is this the new mandatory campaign event?
They're
on stage, they're in documentaries, they're hosting town halls. And if politicians make a good impression here, word travels.
It's a little bit of Hollywood, a little bit of the tech and venture capital world, the political world, and it's all here together in a way that it doesn't come together many other places.
That's Michael Lee. He's originally from Texas. Now he works at NYU studying elections. Politicians soliciting support from young tastemakers, that's nothing new. But the fact that it's happening here, that's a sign of the times. South by Southwest was just an indie music festival back when it launched in the late 80s. It expanded to film and tech as the internet became a thing. Then in 2007, Twitter blew up with a successful coming out party there. And after Obama spoke in 2016, we saw Booker, Bernie, and Beto also come through. This year, seems like everyone from Washington is invited, and they're all auditioning for the title of Most Relatable.
I like Drake, I like Bieber. I think I know more about music than my daughters do.
And there are some other lesser-known names that don't quite roll off the tongue yet.
I didn't even know about Pete Buttigieg.
I can't remember his last name, but...
Buttigieg?
Yes, exactly right.
Say it with me, Buttigieg. The Indiana mayor might be a South by success story. I mean, he raised $600,000 after his CNN town hall here in Austin. Though if anyone could use some buzz, it's John Delaney. He's the former congressman from Maryland who's already been running for president for almost 2 years. Why start that early?
Because I think I'm the right person for the job, and I have the right vision for the country, but not enough people know who I am.
For 2020 hopefuls like Delaney, South by is a chance to really gain recognition, especially when the polls look like this. Actually, when you look at all the other candidates who've also announced, over half showed up in Austin. How much did President Trump factor into your decision to run?
When he won, which to me was a punctuation of decades of terrible politics, I said we got to start thinking differently about everything.
When you say terrible politics, are you talking about Democrats and Republicans or just one side?
Just horribly divisive politics, right, that has basically caused most Americans to think their government doesn't work for them.
An NBC News Wall Street Journal poll says 38% of Americans believe the country needs a third party. Former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz hopes that works in his favor if he runs. So the main critique that you've been fielding is that there's a potential for you to siphon off precious votes from the Democratic candidate.
If there's going to be a spoiler, there's going to be a socialist, left-leaning Democrat. Those lifelong Republicans do not want to vote for Donald Trump, but they will not have a choice. But if I am in the race, I've come to believe that they will vote for me.
Do you think that you would have been met with this much animosity if Trump weren't in the White House?
I think he's such a divisive figure. But if we take a state like Texas, where I've been all week, if Donald Trump loses the state of Texas, chances are he will not get to 270. So if I enter the race, which I have not decided to do, but if I do, Texas for the first time could really be up for grabs.
That's the other big draw of South by Southwest, the location. Democrats really want Texas. They haven't won a statewide contest here since '94. But that could change. Beto's tight race against Cruz helped put it back on the map. In many ways, South by felt like a mini caucus, a dress rehearsal for the real thing next year. Ironically, the person who drew some of the biggest crowds here isn't even old enough to run for president, but she is disruptive, and that's what sells at South by. That was a good time down in Austin. Well, earlier today, the Senate passed a resolution 59-41 to end the national emergency President Trump declared in order to build a border wall. Well, Trump's already promised to veto it, so that had us wondering, what happens next? We asked Garrett Haig to break down the powers of the executive branch and how they've changed over the last few decades.
The Senate voted today on a resolution to block the president's emergency powers, the ones he's using to authorize and pay for building a wall at the southern border. What does any of this mean, and why does it matter? Presidents have had national emergency powers for about as long as we've had presidents. George Washington used national emergency powers. Abraham Lincoln used them to send ships to blockade southern ports. One of the most famous examples of a president using emergency powers was FDR using it to intern tens of thousands of Japanese Americans during World War II. So a president's emergency powers can be incredibly expansive. They can be incredibly broad. Sometimes they can also be really mundane. After Watergate, though, Congress wanted to curb the president's power, and that's why we have the National Emergencies Act of 1976. After this act, it said that any presidential emergencies have to be renewed every single year. And right now, there are 30 national emergencies that have been getting renewed year after year. Probably the most famous is a national emergency that President Carter put in place after the Iranians took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran back in the 70s.
This is NBC Nightly News.
The lives of over 50 innocent people are at stake. The foundation of civilized diplomacy is at stake.
Congress and the courts both have ways that they can block a president's national emergency declaration. Back in 1976, the law said that Congress could pass a concurrent resolution, meaning a simple majority in both houses would be enough to block a president's emergency declaration. In the 1980s, the courts pushed back, though, and said that the president could veto a concurrent resolution. So now it needs both houses to pass something with a veto-proof majority for Congress to block a national emergency. The courts have it a little bit easier. They can block a national emergency, too. They did it to Truman in the 1950s when he tried to nationalize the steel industry. The courts have ruled that the president's national emergency powers are at their strongest when he tries to do something that Congress approves of or hasn't spoken about at all. And they're at their weakest if the president tries to do something that Congress has already spoken about or said they don't want to see get done. This matters because with both houses of Congress voting to oppose the president, it makes it more likely that when this national emergency, the one about building the wall, gets to the Supreme Court, they might look at it and say, here's a president who's acting in defiance of Congress, not with a Congress that's been silent or not paying attention to this issue. So while, yes, the president could veto the resolution that the House and Senate are about to send him, there are 16 states suing the federal government over this issue. So it could be any one of those cases or a group of them that ultimately end up just down the street over here in front of the Supreme Court.
Thanks, Garrett. Well, you've probably been following this absolutely insane college admissions scandal, and now the lawsuits are starting. A suit has been filed on behalf of a Stanford student who says she should have had her application fee refunded and get some of the funds Rick Singer allegedly got from parents in exchange for admission to selective colleges. Now, several of those schools were also named in the lawsuit, and a Bay Area mother said in San Francisco Superior Court that her son, with a 4.2 GPA, didn't get into some of his schools of choice because of the scheme. Alexa Lioto spent some time digging into the documents from the DOJ's investigation to surface the most interesting things money could buy for high school seniors.
So I've been mining the documents coming out of Operation Varsity Blues, and here are some details you might have missed. In one case, CW1, aka the cooperating witness, allegedly told a parent that in order to gain extra time on the standardized test, their daughter needed to be, quote, stupid, and, quote, not to be as smart as she is. The purpose, as investigators describe, was to make sure a psychologist found learning disabilities when evaluating the student, which would then mean extended time on the test, which would then mean a bribed proctor would have time to correct the answers once the student left the test center. In a more elaborate example in the investigator's affidavit, CW1 asked parents for a writing sample, after which a third party, aka CW2, takes the test entirely on behalf of the prospective student. The administrator for that center is allegedly in the loop. And a week later, to hide the fact that they paid someone else entirely to take the test in place of their kid, the parents ask CW1 to send them a practice test so that their kid can unknowingly feel like he's taking a real test. In another repeated instance, according to prosecutors, parents were encouraged to send materials to create fake student-athlete profiles. One parent allegedly bought a bunch of water polo gear off of Amazon, and then a graphic designer photoshopped the son's photo onto a stock photo. In another case, CW1 allegedly had an employee outright lie about a student's height for a fake basketball profile. The boy was 5'5", but his final profile said 6'1". So after William Rick Singer, the now confessed ringleader of the scheme, retrieved the money from the parents, he allegedly would use some of it to bribe coaches, test proctors, and administrators, all to facilitate the process. And while prosecutors describe that most payments were sent by check to the foundation, the affidavit shows some parents getting creative, like in one case where parents are accused of donating over 2,000 shares of Facebook, worth $250,000 roughly, according to prosecutors, to solidify a ticket to UCLA. One last thing. Prosecutors also noted that when one parent asked whether $160,000 was, quote, all it takes, CW1 responds, quote, no, that's not all it takes. This is not TJ Maxx or Marshalls or something like that.
And now, here are some of today's headlines briefly. There was a small victory today for families of the people murdered in the 2012 shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. Justices on the Connecticut Supreme Court have decided that gunmaker Remington can be sued over how it marketed the Bushmaster rifle that was used to kill 20 children and 6 educators at Sandy Hook. The plaintiffs in the case include a survivor and the relatives of 9 people who were killed. And they say Remington glorified the weapon in its marketing to young people. The decision overturns a lower court ruling that said a gunmaker couldn't be sued because of a 2005 federal law that protects gun manufacturers from liability in most cases when their products are used in crimes. But today's ruling means the suit could potentially go to trial, which the gun companies have been trying hard to avoid. Now, Remington has denied wrongdoing and previously insisted it can't be sued under this law. Well, in Venezuela, businesses are reopening and public transportation has picked back up in parts of the country where power was out for almost a week. But things still aren't looking good, and the U.S. is urging Americans in Venezuela to leave. The last remaining American diplomats on the ground left today, and things are still getting worse between Washington and Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. has revoked hundreds of visas from Venezuelans since Monday as part of U.S. efforts to pressure Maduro's government. About a third of those belong to former diplomats from Venezuela and their families. And the U.S. is still supporting opposition leader Juan Guaido, who has declared himself interim president and is trying to oust Maduro. He's asking for free and fair elections in the country. Meanwhile, we have some really important news about a politician from Vermont, but it's not the one you're thinking of. Lincoln, a 3-year-old goat, was sworn in as the honorary mayor of Fairhaven, Vermont earlier this week after narrowly beating Sammy the dog in a tight contest. The small town near the Canadian border doesn't actually have an official mayor, and the idea of having a pet mayor was really just to teach a civics lesson to kids. Now, Lincoln's going to be one busy goat. He's going to march in the Memorial Day parade, greet residents around town, and generally just look cute. And those are your headlines, briefly. We'll be right back in 30 seconds.
We are going to start with something different tonight. This is one of those things that you have not been otherwise hearing about in the news, but stick with me.
Feed your mind with fresh perspective. Get your favorite MSNBC shows now as podcasts.
The topics we cover on MSNBC every day, they're driven by big ideas, big themes, huge societal changes. And that's what we talk about on our new podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening?
Why Is This Happening with Chris Hayes. New episodes every Tuesday.
Well, it's been a crazy week in London where Parliament has been trying to figure out what to do with Brexit, the UK's divorce with the EU. Heading into this week, Prime Minister Theresa May was facing 3 key votes: leave the EU with the deal she negotiated, and Parliament said no. Leave with no deal. Parliament said no. Then today, facing the prospect of chaotic customs issues, nightmarish travel problems, uncertain futures for UK citizens living in the EU and vice versa, Parliament decided to delay Brexit for another 3 months. Keir Simmons is in NBC's London bureau to break it all down for us.
On the streets and in the suburbs of Britain, people thought they were voting for freedom. Instead, what they've had is years of political infighting. And now, a frightening political impasse. Britain stands at a crossroads. In one direction is leaving Europe with no deal, nothing agreed, just breaking out. In another direction is agreeing to a deal offered by the Europeans. Both of those 2 roads have been rejected by British lawmakers this week. And now they have chosen another road. And that road is to delay the deadline altogether, to have Brexit happen later. We don't know how much later, maybe months, maybe longer. The problem is, of course, that somewhere down this road is another crossroads just like this one. All they're doing is delaying the inevitable, because Europe still says there's only one deal on the table, take it or leave it, and there aren't enough British lawmakers to agree to leave Europe without any deal whatsoever. In the process, Britain is being humiliated. Its great political system, admired around the world, is unable to make a decision. Humiliation. It's exactly what the British people were voting against.
Thanks for that, Keir. Well, the U.S. women's soccer team will defend their world championship title in just 3 months. But before that, they've got another goal in mind: wage equality. That's why all the women from the U.S. soccer team are suing the U.S. Soccer Federation and alleging institutionalized gender discrimination. Now, just for background, the U.S. men's soccer team has never won a World Cup. The women's team won 3. The U.S. women also hold 4 gold medals. The men's team hasn't won an Olympic medal since 1904. So straight up, the men just don't win as much as the women, but they still make more money. Alex Morgan and Megan Rapinoe spoke about their new court battle on Today.
Why on earth wouldn't we pay people equally and treat people equally and, invest in people equally?
But in women's sports, this dynamic is nothing new. In the 70s, the famous tennis player Billie Jean King pioneered the protest for equal prize money. Then, decades later, Venus Williams carried on King's legacy and actually got Wimbledon to change their policy. The women of big wave surfing fought for this same thing and won on a civil rights violation. And female hockey players actually had to boycott in order to win fair bonuses and higher wages. But the disparity is probably the most obvious in the NBA. WNBA revenues just aren't as high, and consequently, female players see far fewer zeros on their paychecks. In order to get what they want, the U.S. women's soccer team will have to prove they put in the same amount of work as the men's team. The fact that they consistently outperform their male counterparts could work in their favor here. The U.S. Soccer Federation has not responded to NBC's request for comment, by the way. But the trickiest part of this whole thing is the pay structure. The men's team makes $262,000 a year. The women's team, $99,000 a year. Now, the men also take home higher bonuses. Here's how it works, though. The men only get paid if they play. The women, on the other hand, do have a guaranteed salary, even if they get injured and don't play. It's just a smaller salary and comes with less bonuses.
I think that we've had incredible success. We've been able to push the sport forward in so many ways, both on and off the field. Just from a soccer perspective, but commercially as well, because I really feel that the potential of this team is massively untapped.
Their success has driven revenue for the U.S. women's soccer team. So no matter how much these women win on the field, they still feel sidelined by the system. The U.S. women's soccer team say they're confident they're going to win this one. And they believe that would be a victory for female athletes everywhere. And speaking of athletes, Shaquille O'Neal has a new passion project, but it's probably not what you think. The NBA Hall of Famer wants to spread the word about heart health. Dr. Shamar Charles from NBC's medical unit sat down with Shaq along with Dr. Elizabeth O'Philly to talk about why heart failure is so prevalent among African Americans.
Shaq, you're one of the biggest stars in the world. You're a four-time champion. Dr. O'Philly, you're one of the top cardiologists in the world. What brings this partnership together?
Well, I met Dr. O'Philly a couple months ago, and she gave me some information that I had no idea what was going on. 5.5 million Americans are affected by heart failure every year, but it particularly hits the African American community very hard. And, you know, she said that she wanted me to help get the word out.
How does heart health, how does it manifest differently maybe in African Americans as opposed to other races?
We have a significant disparity. The evidence out there from clinical studies that African Americans do have a higher risk in terms of getting the disease, but also more importantly, when they have the disease, problem with awareness as well as access to treatment. But we also know there are other differences in terms of what's happening with the blood vessels. How are you reacting? Some people know with a family history, maybe they're more predisposed to high blood pressure or diabetes. So all of that is significant interplay. The big message is to say to people, heart disease is still the #1 killer of everyone.
I think it's fair to say that most men, including myself, like I look in the mirror and say, I'm healthy, I don't need a doctor, I'm not going to check. Just want everybody to go check with your physician, consult with your doctor, and just see.
You've been an athlete your entire,
so I don't,
you know what I'm saying, your entire life. If we were looking at risk categories, you could very easily say, I'm in the low risk category. I work out for, you know, a living, you know, and yet you're passionate about this.
Very passionate. Like I said, I'm passionate about the community. I realize that the older I get, I have to change my lifestyle a little bit. Let me go on the record and say I don't have heart failure issues. I don't have those problems. But, you know, when I felt that I wanted to be the one to lend the voice to let people know, especially African Americans, this is really serious. We got to take it seriously. We got to start, you know, consulting with our doctors.
As we get older, we have these conversations about our health a little bit more than we did when we were younger during your
a little bit more.
Are you having these conversations a little bit more?
Definitely. I'm 47, and if I didn't have a conversation with Dr. Feely, I wouldn't have known that heart failure affects African Americans community harder than it does any other group. Never knew that. And Doctor's a very intelligent woman. Throws a lot of big words. She gives it to me, I break it down for the people. For example, you want information on this, you go to ShaqGetsReal.com. Because when I was talking to her, she was throwing big words out, IMDb and
oh Lord,
Clockamine and Sockamine and all that. So I'm gonna be the guy to break it down for people.
If you could do one small thing, make one small change to help your heart health specifically, what would that be?
Well, I think it would be really important if you have risk factors to know what that risk is, right? So it's that checkup once a year.
I've been calling myself Superman since 17 years old, and I don't have a family physician. Never had a doctor. The only time I went to doctors when I had injuries, so I probably have to get one of those very soon.
Something very satisfying about seeing Shaq sit on those little step stools at the gym. Well, we want to leave you with something a bit different. Our friends over at Left Field looked into a South Korean trend called mukbang, where people binge eat super messy food on their webcam while chatting with a live audience. No, this is real. Take a look.
In the past year, here's what we've been looking up. But why are these words on our minds? First up, mukbang.
Okay, so mukbang. Basically, it's a live stream of somebody eating themselves senseless, all the while chatting to their devoted fans and followers.
Today we are back with another dun-dun mukbang!
So far, so internet.
But how did it come to be? Put simply, Korea.
It's a smush of the words for eating and broadcast.
people started doing it on Korea's Afrika TV, but then as streaming services like YouTube and Twitch got massive, it jumped the ocean. So it's clear that people have a lot of time and food on their hands.
But what's also clear is Korea's rising dominance online. Korea's economy has grown incredibly fast. They have the fastest internet connection speeds in the whole wide world. And when it comes to who's using all that lovely speedy internet, it's basically everyone. Internet usage as a percentage of population is higher in Korea than in the USA. All of which means that trends like these will have a pretty big impact online. Also, Korea's consciously making an effort to reach audiences outside of the country. So this influence in fashion and beauty and music and entertainment, it's not surprising, and it's called the Korean wave, or Hallyu. So by the time YouTubers like these guys publish their own mukbangs roughly around the same few months of 2018, the term has become cemented in the search bar. So I guess, eat up!
And that's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.